It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Liberal Democrat leadership hopeful Ed Davey, Conservative MP Gillian Keegan, Labour MP Stephen Kinnock and Daily Telegraph Associate Editor Camilla Tominey. Today, who said Johnson versus Hunt would be a good, clean fight?
The way to earn that trust with Conservative Party members and with the country is to subject yourself to scrutiny.
Should that scrutiny extend to candidates' private lives?
Snoopers are always unattractive. Curtain twitchers, sort of Corbynista curtain twitchers, are not attractive.
We'll talk to John McDonnell about Labour's plan for a green economy.
If we don't make that transition for the better, the climate will make it for the worse.
And who fancies a 4-day week?
It's Thursday, just gone 3 o'clock, so about 3 hours' time, and I'm going to start my weekend.
Now, let's start with the question, should Boris Johnson just come out and answer the question directly about the row with his girlfriend, Carrie Symonds? Ed?
I think he should. I think he's seemed to be hiding, and the whole approach that Boris Johnson is doing is not subjecting himself to scrutiny on anything. And I remember Theresa May in the 2017 election, she thought she'd won. She didn't subject herself to scrutiny and she lost. So Boris Johnson's advisers need to sort of sort themselves out. And I also think the whole thing is fairly unedifying, isn't it? I mean, we saw that appalling debate last week. The Tory party nasty contest has just got nastier.
Gillian, should he answer specifically the question about the row with his girlfriend?
Well, it's obviously his choice, but if it was me, I would say yes. I mean, what couple hasn't had a row? I find it extraordinary that people... I mean, it was a row. It wasn't, you know, anything else. I would just say, yeah, we had a row and nothing serious, everything's fine. I think what's extraordinary about this is it's very unusual to have a row and your neighbours to be recording you and then to send it off to The Guardian and then insist the police actually take a record of it because the police went and said nothing to see and didn't record it. Sure. And then they insisted. So there is definitely a politically motivated thing
we'll come back to that.
A row's a row. What couple hasn't had a row? It's welcome to the human race, you know, we all do it.
But if it is just a row, why should he come out and actually answer questions about his private life directly?
Well, the fact of the matter is he's running to be the Prime Minister of this country, and if you're not clear about what's happened, it raises a tremendous amount of questions and it becomes a much bigger issue. I simply don't understand why he didn't come out and make a short statement at that hustings saying what had happened. But the fact that he hasn't makes it look like he's got something to hide. I mean, it's the ABC of politics, which is to be clear, be transparent and move on. Now, what we should be moving on to is the fact that he has a reckless plan to be crashing our country out of the European Union on the 31st of October, and the impact that that would have on communities up and down the country. That's far more important, actually, than whether or not he had a row with his girlfriend the other night.
But in order to get onto that, Camilla, does he have to come out and answer the question about what happened with his girlfriend first?
Well, I think, first of all, he's being elected or hoping to be elected as Prime Minister, not the Pope, point one. Point two, I think that there's a politically motivated element to how the row came to be in the papers, and it's been well documented. If he opens the door to talking about this, then I think there's a concern that his whole private life is going to be fair game, and it has been, by his own admission, pretty checkered. But I do agree with Stephen in the sense that in not answering questions about this, it is exposing somewhat his reluctance to answer questions in general, which has been a key attack line by Jeremy Hunt this morning. Mr. Nice Guy has turned slightly nasty in saying you're bottling. And if he looks like he's obfuscating on general issues, this is contributing to that, I think. And he needs to start being a bit more open about his political beliefs and not shy away. And then this private stuff will actually go away.
Right, Gillian, just to clarify, who are you backing?
Well, I backed Rory Stewart and he went out Wednesday night. The whole thing was over by Thursday night, so I didn't declare for anybody else after that, and I didn't really see the point. And so I haven't actually said. I'm still got the same criteria, which is who will be honest about the situation this country is facing and who will lead us in the right direction, because still we hear, you know, we're going to crash out, we're going to go out on the 31st of October no matter what, or we're going to go out with no deal no matter what. And actually, if you understand how a lot of these businesses work, that is not a sensible suggestion for any Prime Minister to make.
Who are you minded to support on the basis of that? There can't be much more that are going to persuade you one way or the other.
No, and to be honest, it's now over to other people. It's over to my members, right? So I don't want to influence them, not that I could, but, you know, they'll make their own decision. I've had my say. They will now have their say. So that's why I haven't felt the need to, really.
All right, we're going to...
Past our bit, you know, it's handed over.
We're going to interrupt now. We're going to welcome a Boris Johnson supporter onto the set in a moment. But first of all, let's go to the City and speak to the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. I hope you can hear me there, John. And talk about climate change as a key priority for Labour. You've said you're looking at a target of 2030 rather than 2050 as the date for achieving net zero carbon emissions. Now, that's 20 years earlier than most other Western European countries, and even the EU is looking at cutting emissions by 40% by 2030. Surely that goal would be unrealistic, to try and achieve zero net carbon emissions by 2030.
No, I've said our target is net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but if we can bring that sooner, so much the better. And that's why we're talking to people like Extinction Rebellion and others, saying, look, what ideas have you got to do this? Because so far the science is saying it's not possible, but we're open to ideas on this. Let's have this discussion.
Right. I mean, could it become something that you will pledge then, bringing forward that date by 10, maybe up to 20 years?
Well, we've already said as soon as we possibly can, but we'll be led by the science and what's practical and pragmatic. But also, you know, we've got to listen to the whole range of views on this. And often, you know, it's been the campaigners of the past that have actually got it right rather than some of the scientists. So we'll bring that all together and see how best we can bring that target forward, and because this is a climate emergency.
Now, one of the charities behind trying to push for more progress on climate change has said in order to bring that target forward dramatically, it would mean severely restricting flights. Just as one example, people flying once every few years. The public wouldn't swallow that, would they?
No, we've got to take people with us, but part of this discussion now is making sure that we all do recognise there's a climate emergency. And I think there is a growing awareness of that now. And therefore, what we've got to do is see how can we achieve that transition. But it's got to be a just transition. And it's got to be done in a way, yes, that we bring people with us. And I think people are up for fairly radical change now because, well, this is an existential threat to our planet. They want their children, their grandchildren to survive, and that's why, yes, we'll look at a whole range of policy options. And that in the City today, what we're talking about is how do we harness, yes, the investment resources of the government, but also the private sector to invest in the alternative technologies that we need.
Before more discussion on climate change can go on, Brexit probably needs to be sorted out one way or another. It looks as if the Shadow Cabinet is going to back Remain in a second referendum. That will be made clear tomorrow, we've been told. What are you going to say, John McDonnell, to the likes of Len McCluskey, the General Secretary of Unite, and the party chairman, Ian Lavery, who are dead against it?
Well, the consultation's going on at the moment. We're a Democratic Party. We met as a Shadow Cabinet last week. All our National Executive Committee members are being consulted by Jeremy Corbyn. He's meeting the unions today to consult them as well. We meet again as a Shadow Cabinet tomorrow, and hopefully now we'll arrive at a position that we can then publicly campaign for. And, you know, I'm in the same position as Ian Lavery. My constituency voted leave, but my view now is the first thing we've got to do is prevent a no-deal Brexit, and actually I believe it's better going back to the people now and letting them have a say. And in that campaign, I would campaign for Remain because I think it will protect people's jobs and their living standards. But let's have that debate and be honest about it and recognise and respect that there will be different views.
Right, your position is clear, and we are expecting Labour to announce their shift in policy in terms of backing Remain in a referendum, another referendum. But my question is still the same. How do you square that with important figures in the Labour Party who are not interested in that debate? They're just vociferously against it, and they have said so repeatedly.
But that's why we've got to respect other people's views and allow them to express those views.
And then reject them.
Jeremy Corbyn mentioned, I spoke to him, before about, what Harold Wilson did, which was he basically said, here's our party position, here's what I believe in, but yes, there will be different views and people should have that right to express those views, particularly if they're representing their local constituency views. I can completely understand that. That's the nature of this debate, because this issue is so important and so fundamental to the future of our country, to the living standards of our people.
All right, before I let you go, John, we've had news that John Prescott, the former Labour Deputy Prime Minister, is in hospital having suffered a stroke. Is there any more detail you can tell us about his condition?
No, I believe the family have put out a statement only a short while ago saying thank you to the NHS workers, the paramedics and others who've worked so hard to ensure that John comes through this. And I want to send my best wishes to John and my love to all his family. I think right the way across the Labour and trade union movement, and even I think amongst a number of his political opponents, will all be wishing him a speedy recovery.
All right, John McDonnell, thank you very much. Let's return to the Conservative leadership contest. Let's just show our viewers the front page of The Times. And Jeremy Hunt has said that Boris Johnson is a coward. Is that how you see it, Camilla? Is he a coward for not facing the scrutiny?
Well, no, I don't think he's a coward, because initially the electorate was 313 MPs, and at the time the campaign was very much focused on winning over support within the Houses of Parliament with a view to being in the final two. And to be fair, there had been talk about 6 to 12 months ago of Boris not making it into the final two, and he hadn't done enough work on MPs in order to convince them that he was the way forward. So I think that was appropriate. Now the electorate has extended somewhat. It's now, we think, anything between 100,000 and 160,000 members. They're going out to the hustings, but as I said earlier, I think he does have to now come forward and make the arguments. Journalistically, of course, I'd be plumping for him to be in other debates, because I think it's a two-horse race and both of them need to give the most fulsome and comprehensive account of themselves as possible.
All right, let's welcome Robert Buckland in, Tory MP, Solicitor General. He's supporting Boris Johnson. Just while you're settling in, Gillian, isn't it a bit rich of Jeremy Hunt to, first of all, say he doesn't want to talk about Boris Johnson's personal life, he wants to focus on policy, and now he's calling him a coward for avoiding scrutiny about his personal life?
Actually, I don't think he said it's about his personal life. He said scrutiny. So he's basically said there's a Sky debate that's been suggested
and
delayed, and there's very much a need to have more scrutiny before the ballot papers are issued for the postal votes. So effectively, he's saying he needs to go under more scrutiny. If you watch the hustings, which I did last night on Catch-Up TV, actually what you saw was Boris was a brilliant journalist. I mean, he was great. He deflected a lot of the answers. I mean, he dealt with Ian Dale magnificently, I thought. But he didn't go into the detail. And if you looked at the detail of the answers, there were slogans. There's nothing you could implement in terms of a policy. And actually, that's not good enough. So if he's got the cheering, adoring crowd of the Tory membership and a journalist that can't hold another journalist to account, then I think he ought to come under more scrutiny. And I am somebody who will have to be there implementing whatever it is.
There's a critical issue here for the whole country. We have one candidate who is happy to have a hard Brexit, in Jeremy Hunt, which will damage the economy. We've got another candidate who wants a no-deal Brexit, which will destroy the economy. And I want both of them to come under scrutiny. You know that Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. Of course we do. And I want to have both their arguments exposed and really dealt with, because it's critical we do that before either of them gets to number 10.
Robert Buckland, let's just return to the issue we first discussed at the top of the programme. Were the couple that have been reported in the press right to report the incident between Boris Johnson and Carrie Symonds to the police?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the whys and wherefores of who said what. The police attended.
Yeah.
They've made a statement that there were no issues of continuing concern for them. Due process has been followed. I think the matter's closed.
So they were right to report it, though, to the police?
Look, as members of the public, they've got to use their judgment according to what they think at the time. This clearly has been looked at by the police. Police officers attended. The matter's been dealt with.
Was it right that the couple recorded what was happening?
Because, again, I don't want to get into the whys and wherefores. I don't know the precise details. I've obviously read
you know
newspaper
they recorded
reports.
it, obviously. Was it right
Yes.
for them to record
Well,
it, but it could have been used as evidence if the police did decide to pursue it?
I just don't think it's right of me, wearing my lawyer's hat, I just don't have the information to make a judgment on the details.
Some of your colleagues have been pretty forthright. Corbynista curtain twitchers, says Jacob Rees-Mogg, Priti Patel, something straight out of the Soviet Union.
Well, it's a matter for them to make comments. I mean, look, I think that all of us in our private lives have things and matters we've done or not done. None of us is perfect. We're all flawed. We're all broken. And Boris, I think, is just another human being like the rest of us.
So should they have leaked it to The Guardian once they'd got the recording?
Well, look,
in the name of public interest, as they said.
It's entirely a matter for their judgment. My personal view is that the police were called, they looked at the matter, they closed the matter, it's been dealt with.
If you received, Camilla, a similar recording involving Jeremy Corbyn, for example, you'd put it on the front page, wouldn't you?
If we could determine that it would be in the public interest to justify the intrusion into his privacy, that's the legal bar. I was only going to take up a brief thing with Gillian. It's the politician in Boris that is deflecting, not the journalist.
Oh, I
It's
see
the
a journalist
It's
as
the journalist that hopes to provide some scrutiny to this. What I find ironic about the Guardian situation in them having that private recording, somebody apparently lurking in the corridor to get the footage, is this is the bastion of the post-Levisonian era where we must all be respecting the private lives of public figures. Where's the comment piece from Hugh Grant and Steve Coogan decrying this gross invasion of privacy? Oh, they're not doing that because this person isn't on the left.
Is it about private life?
I don't think so in this case. I mean, the reality is, if it was an isolated case, I think people would have a lot more sympathy for him. But, Boris has form in his behaviour, the way he tells lies. I mean, this is a guy who was sacked as a journalist for telling lies. This is a guy who was sacked from the front bench by Michael Howard, the Conservative Party leader, for telling lies. His behaviour and the use of his language sometimes is completely unacceptable for many of us. And I think if this occasion had been completely isolated and out of character and out with all the other things that he's done, I think people would have put it aside.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it's in the context of all the rest of the way that this man behaves.
But politicians do tell lies, like the Lib Dems saying they were going to axe tuition fees.
No, that was a coalition agreement.
Well, hang on,
that wasn't
hang on.
right. That's completely outrageous.
I'm going to put this back to Ed Davey, because 3 days ago you said that tabloids might rake up stories about his private life, but that is absolutely no business of mine. I am only concerned about the legitimacy or otherwise of his Brexit policy. You've changed your tune.
No. In the context of all the other behaviours that I've described, I think that is relevant. But I've kept going back to the point is let him face the scrutiny on his policies.
Right. And what about the scrutiny on his policies? He isn't facing the scrutiny. Gillian has just said herself he was deflecting answers. He needs more scrutiny.
He's going to be taking part in another 16 or 17 hustings that are being televised. He'll take part in debates. Boris Johnson is a politician who has had years of scrutiny. He's going through massive scrutiny at the moment. Due diligence is being done in a way that perhaps we haven't seen, in our political lifetime.
So why the delay on the head-to-head debate on Sky?
I'm absolutely sure that Boris Johnson will be taking part in debates, public exchanges. He will be questioned on his policies, as he was by Ian on Saturday for all of us to see. That will continue. He will undergo intense scrutiny in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
But he's going to win. I mean, let's be clear. The Conservative Party membership is not going to vote for somebody who voted Remain. So I don't know why Boris just doesn't go ahead, and he can win this at a canter. He will simply go on he should go on the Sky TV debates. He should go on every debate that he can and simply say, well, I led the Leave campaign and Jeremy Hunt has sort of flip-flopped around this whole issue. He will win. Let's be absolutely clear. We're about to elect a charlatan and a huckster who says whatever needs to be said to whoever needs to hear it as the Prime Minister of this country. And although I disagree profoundly with just about everything the Conservative Party stands for, it is a very important and one of the oldest parties in the world. And I think that it is a sad moment that they're about to elect somebody like Boris Johnson as their leader. But that's what's going to happen.
People said
and
that
you might
about
as well go on the
Corbyn,
telly and do it.
Charlatan and a huckster.
Well, look, I just think that sort of language, the sort of personalisation of this debate, does nobody any favours at all. We're trying, in this politics, to restore some equilibrium and calm to what has become a bitterly divided country. We have to set an example, and I think that sort of politics, frankly, has no place if we are really serious about trying to get the balance.
But I don't see how calling Muslim women letterboxes helps to reunite the country.
Right, but hang on. The point I want to put to Gillian is Stephen just said he's going to win. And actually, there is some support for that view because grassroots Tories were still cheering Boris Johnson as he was being asked questions about his personal life and other things. That's because he has said, now you may not believe him, but he has said categorically he will take the UK out of the EU by October the 31st, something that Jeremy Hunt hasn't.
This is what's wrong with this whole debate. Everybody's looking at it through the prism of how you voted. Everything is still the same. The parliamentary maths are still the same. The European Union position is still the same. What we actually need to do to have an orderly Brexit is still the same. Luckily, Stephen and co have now woken up to the fact that actually there's nothing wrong with the withdrawal agreement. It's just to get us out, and then shaping the deal is the next thing. But that's what I read in that letter. The fact is, everybody's looking through it, the prism of the impossible. And what we need to do is be honest and say, this is what is possible. And for the sake of 30 people in Parliament of any colour not supporting this agreement, we're talking about inflicting damage on thousands of business and millions of our citizens by people who actually don't even know the extent of how deep those integrations are and how hard they are to pull apart. I've done decades in business and I know this is going to be difficult, but all these slogans were supposed to be implemented in months. That is the scrutiny that everybody needs. And it's not good enough to look at it through the lens of how somebody voted 3 years ago, because none of the other facts are changing.
A word on
the
withdrawal agreement bill, which I believe Labour should support, is it's a very different bill to what has been put before us hitherto, because it contains a number of key concessions to Labour's position that we secured through the cross-party talks, a bill on workers' rights, environmental and consumer standards, even a commitment to having a set-piece debate and binding vote on whether it should go to a second referendum. Whether you want a deal-based Brexit or a second referendum, the only way to get that is to vote through the withdrawal agreement bill.
So why didn't you vote for it? You had 3 opportunities, Stephen.
Because, as I've said, Joe, what was put before us until the cross-party talks was a blind Brexit. It didn't have any clarity on a customs arrangement, on workers' rights, on environment. There were concessions to us secured by our excellent negotiating team, but we should vote for it because it basically contains all the concessions that we were asking for.
So
in
you're
the
going to
first
have
place.
Labour support in the shape of Stephen Kinnock, Caroline Flint and others, perhaps up to 26 who've signed this letter to Jeremy Corbyn saying Brexit must be delivered. Is Boris Johnson going to bring back Theresa May's bill with one change?
Well, look, I welcome Stephen's comments, but, you know, one swallow doesn't make a summer. We've had a terribly bruising experience. You know, Gillian and I voted for this deal 3 times. We were there. We'd have left the European Union by now if our position had been maintained. But we are in a different world now. So, and I think it would be wrong, frankly, for Boris or any Conservative leadership contender to try and predict precisely what might work in terms of electoral mathematics. We don't know yet.
So he hasn't got a plan. He hasn't got a plan. Is he going to stick, Boris Johnson, to Theresa May's plan in the main?
Well, look, Boris has said that he does not deliberately want to see a no deal. He will not support a policy that deliberately engineers a no deal.
So is this Theresa May's plan with a change to the backstop?
Well, look, he's talked about the change to the backstop. He's talked about alternative arrangements. He's also talked about...
Never mind, the
looking
EU,
at
of course, have said they won't do that.
Well, look, I'm a realist like everybody else, and so is he. The fact is the time is short. The EU at the moment of stonewalling. But we do have those weeks in which we can work together. Stephen's offer is an interesting and important one. Let's work together to try and make sure we avoid a crash out and the disorder that all of us in this room, I think, would agree would be bad for the economy.
The only advantage I can see of Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister is he's quite capable of changing his mind totally and doing a complete U-turn.
What, and calling a second referendum?
Potentially. And if they tabled the withdrawal agreement bill conditional on a people's vote, Liberal Democrats and other opposition parties said we would then vote for it. That would bring the country together, bring Parliament together.
Can you rule out that Boris Johnson, in any circumstance, won't call a second referendum?
Well, I can't see it happening. I mean, the Conservative Party in the main, almost to a man and woman, I think there are one or two colleagues who've called for it, have set their face very much against a second referendum. And I know that would be unpopular, frankly, in constituencies like Stevens and other places where more uncertainty will just damage...
Hang on, because we're going to get to a second referendum. Let's go over to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar. He has a documentary out this evening about the Tory leadership contest. Just before we talk to you, John, let's just hear an excerpt from it.
Are the numbers there to stop a no deal on October the 31st, maybe using a vote of no confidence in the government?
So I believe that that absolutely is the case. I think a dozen or so members of Parliament would, on our side, would be voting against supporting of no deal. And that would include ministers as well as backbenchers.
John, tell us a little bit more about the documentary on the basis of what Tobias Ellwood has said.
Well, Joe, I think thanks to Tobias Ellwood there, we can say with some confidence that in the event of the next Prime Minister driving towards an exit with no deal, if attempts to find another deal in Europe, we know they are not exactly promising, if those efforts fail, if no other means is found to block a no-deal Brexit, leaving with no deal, those options have been explored exhaustively, Joe, and the advice from the House of Commons and outside experts is that there's no way of doing that as things stand. So the idea of the nuclear button, a vote of no confidence in the government, as the remaining means of stopping the government in its tracks before taking the country out with no deal, that it could come down to that. And Tobias Ellwood is telling us that the numbers are there to make that vote, that defeat, actually happen. Now, to be clear, as far as I can make out from the conversations that I've had, these rebels, these potential rebels inside the government and outside, would much rather not have to do that. The threat of being defeated in a vote of no confidence, potentially bringing down the government, potentially ending the premiership of the next leader as soon as it's begun, that might make that leader think again. But so strongly do they feel that a no-deal Brexit would be politically and economically self-harm to the country that they're looking at this thing, talking to each other in private meetings. And there are cabinet ministers sympathetic and knowing these conversations are going on, or talking over WhatsApp on social media. This is where we are just at the moment. So those, and there are those saying this won't happen, this threat would melt away. Well, Tobias Ellwood has got across the message they need to think again.
John, thank you very much. And you can watch the full panorama by John Pienaar, the race for number 10, tonight on BBC One at 8:30. Robert Buckland, no deal can never happen on the basis that there would be a vote of no confidence and at least a dozen Tories would support it.
Well, look, I think that this is wild talk, frankly. You know, anybody who can predict precisely where we're going to be at the end of October is a better politician than I am. And I think making that sort of threat now is frankly premature. You know, let's look at the consequences of it. The consequences could be to usher in a Corbyn SNP coalition. Now, come on, really? Is any self-respecting Conservative going to want to be complicit?
Well, according to your colleague Tobias Ellwood, he says yes, and there seems to be the evidence for it. They are prepared to do that, which means that any threat or promise of no deal by Boris Johnson just is meaningless.
And it needn't be a Corbyn government. You could have, and I've been arguing, for a government of national unity, where you have perhaps a Labour backbencher becoming the Prime Minister, bringing people who are against no deal and believe that people should have...
I don't think it's got that bad yet.
Fantasy.
Hang on.
It's not fantasy at all. It needs to happen because we need to make sure our country gets out of this total mess that your party has caused, and one of the best ways of doing it is taking back to the people.
Ed,
a government of national unity could do that.
What are you going to do with the Labour front bench, Ed? In previous examples of that, you've had the front benches of both parties coming together. Yes, it caused a big division in Labour in 31, but I cannot see that happening.
These are exceptional times.
Well, but
yes, so you need exceptional people,
not a front bench worthy of the name.
All right, what do you make, though, of a dozen of your Conservative colleagues would be prepared to support a Labour vote of no confidence, when that might be, we don't know, in terms of stopping no deal?
So here's what actually needs to happen. Anybody who wants to bring forward no deal has to come up with a proper no deal plan, and then it needs to be looked at and people need to vote on it or not. If there's no confidence in that plan, i.e. it's a slogan, and it doesn't say these are the tariff structures, these are affected industries, these are affected jobs, these are the mitigating strategies, this is what and be honest with the public, because nobody's saying what it means. If they do that, then there has to be a vote on it.
All right.
And if people then don't like it, then of course everybody will be able to scrutinise that. If they stick to this no deal, bad deal, all this slogans and rhetoric, then actually
Absolutely right.
you cannot implement that, and therefore you can't just let them blindly go with a slogan.
All right,
it would be irresponsible.
We're going to let you go, Robert, thank you. Can I just show everybody, but Camilla particularly, the front page of the Evening Standard, Boris's show of unity. There he is with Carrie Symonds. Will that be enough to stop the story?
Well, I don't know. It depends how people view that conveniently taken photograph at this current time.
What are you saying?
Long distance lens, I'm sure.
Well, I don't know. There's obviously this is a news story that needs to be managed.
Not a setup.
Did they have matching shirts?
Yeah,
that looked a bit.
Well, on that, before we get onto the retail side of this story, Robert, thank you very much. Let's move on. Now, would anybody like to work one less day a week on the same pay? Have a look at this firm in Brighton, where all staff have a 4-day week.
Imagine living a life where every weekend you had 3 days off work instead of 2. But you still earn the same as you did for a 5-day week. For workers at this recruitment firm in Brighton, it's become reality.
I definitely feel like I do get a rest every single week, so I haven't got that same sense of panic of like, oh my God, I've got so much to do, I've got so much to do, and then I just go, when you stop.
Of course, it's Thursday, just gone 3 o'clock, so about 3 hours time, I'm going to start my weekend.
We have one life, and we can't spend it all in work. We've, together as a society, we've created a particular model of working time which limits us in so many ways.
David Stone is the chief exec of MRL Recruitment. This year, he began a 6-month trial to see if a 4-day week can yield the same productivity as 5.
Yes, I was very nervous. If I get it wrong, it could be a disaster.
No extra hours have been added on Monday to Thursday, and pay has stayed the same.
We looked at it very, very closely, but the more I read on it, we started looking at it from a recruitment and retention point of view. But the more you look at it, and you're getting into the realms of work-life balance, mental health in the workplace, which is a huge one right now, absenteeism, reductions in illness, blah, 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 blah. And that's where you start, in the end, you start thinking it's an absolute no-brainer. If we can make this work, it's a game changer.
I think that it's definitely made me happier, it's been really good for my home life, and it means that I get so much more done.
My family are from Milton Keynes, so being able to travel back and see them for weekends a lot more has been great. Not stuck in M25 traffic on a Friday, it's been fantastic. Looking after myself health-wise as well.
Although it's common in Scandinavia, the 4-day week trend is relatively new in the UK, but pressure is building for politicians to back it.
Let's face it, eliminating a day of work each week without cutting pay is going to appeal to most people. But campaigners for the 4-day week argue there are more merits to this case than simply improving people's work-life balance.
There is a very close connection between levels of work and things like CO2 production.
Aidan Harper works for the New Economics Foundation and leads the national campaign for a 4-day week.
We know on a day-to-day basis that the most energy-intensive things that we can do are commuting and eating. In a world with less work, we will have more time to do things which are more environmentally friendly. So walking and cycling instead of driving, cooking with fresh ingredients rather than heating up energy-intensive frozen food products.
This might work for some private businesses, but when you think of hospitals, schools, the care sector, how on earth can you implement this without it costing a lot of public money?
I would flip that round and say, can we afford not to reduce working time for these people? We know that teachers and people working in hospitals are some of the most overworked people in society. It is destroying those professions. Those people are overworked. There is a mental health crisis within those professions.
It's estimated more than 15 million working days are lost each year in the UK due to work-related stress. Campaigners say a 4-day week would reduce that number and increase productivity. The Labour Party's grassroots organisation Momentum is supporting the campaign and is calling for it to become party policy at the next election.
We're going to make this work. For a start, I'm not going to have the egg on my face of having to go back to 5-day working weeks in 6 months' time. So we're going to have to make this work, and we're doing it for the right reasons.
Stephen, Labour have been looking at this. They've been talking to Lord Skidelsky, who's been leading an inquiry and going to make recommendations, I think, mainly about the public sector. But do you think it could work?
I think it's a really interesting idea. I'm not sure that it can be a one-size-fits-all. I think there are certain businesses that would really struggle because they don't have the scale. But what's really important as well is that it can't just be a measure in isolation. It has to be part of a much broader industrial strategy where you can actually fund, get investment moving so that companies invest in their plant and machinery, because if you need that, if this is about solving the productivity puzzle, it's not going to work on its own. It's got to be part of a complete shift in the way that our economy works. And actually, going back to your previous interview with John McDonnell, the link into the green industrial revolution, because of course, if you reduce working hours, that's going to have a positive impact in terms of the environment as well. So there's an opportunity here to create more jobs, to create the right kind of jobs, but it can't just be a measure in isolation. It has to be embedded in a broader industrial strategy.
Adding to that, I would say that I think there needs to be more flexibility when it comes to workers and their output as opposed to workers and their hours. This obsession with 9 to 5, everyone commuting on the same crowded trains and coming back, when it doesn't actually suit working mothers, particularly who are trying to factor in school runs and even attending things at school for their children. What difference does it make if you started at 11 and you had a break to collect the children and then you went back to work in the evening if the work gets done? So this kind of rigorous adherence to the way things were done post-industrial revolution needs to change. Equally, again, thinking about working women, I do get concerned when I hear friends who say, I'm going to do 3 days a week, and then I find out they're actually doing 4 to 4.5, but only being paid for 3. So it needs to be a situation where these companies that you've showed in that film, clearly it works for them economically, but one doesn't want to get to the point where people are actually being paid less to do the same amount, just crammed into a shorter time frame.
If it does increase productivity and the number of days that people take off sick goes down because they're working a 4-day week, shouldn't this be the sort of radical policy that the Liberal Democrats would pursue?
Well, we're happy to look at it, but I do believe it's about flexibility and choice. So when I was the Employment Affairs Minister during the Coalition, we looked at right to request flexible working. We extended it to everybody, so more people could have the opportunity to get flexible working. We looked at shared parental leave, and we brought it in to enable young couples to be able to manage and share the leave that the state has given them in a way that suited them. And I think that more flexible, more choice-focused way is absolutely the way forward. And I think that leads to greater productivity. So there is a win for the economy, and there's a win for parents and for workers.
Gillian?
Well, clearly the future of work is going to be very different than the past of work. And, you know, technology has enabled a revolution in the way that we work. As Camilla said, output-based. Agile working is the phrase that businesses use. And actually, it's cultural. It's a cultural shift that we need now. That's already happened. We were talking before about Fridays. In the last 10 years, many more people work at home on Fridays. It gives you a little bit more time to, as the guy said, do some exercise in the morning, the thing you've been promising yourself you'd do all week. Gives you a bit of more, you know, time to also fit in some of the chores and stuff like that. So it really is about this cultural change towards agile working, which I believe many businesses are definitely up for. And the way that they'll compete in the future will be on this package, because we have very low unemployment in this country. To get the talent, you will need to offer agile working.
And people work at home, people work at home and in coffee shops because with their iPhones and their tablets, they can be contacted all the time. So the way we work is completely different. So Camilla's right. We shouldn't look at the sort of industrial 9 to 5 approach. We've got to get real, get it in the modern age.
Well, we've seen a massive increase in the number of self-employed people, but that does actually raise concerns as well about people being exploited. And we've seen large numbers of people where they're declaring that they're self-employed, but then that's all about actually then employers not having to pay national insurance contributions. So then we do need to make sure that when we're moving forward into this new world of work, that people's rights are respected and that it's not used as a Trojan horse for exploitation.
Right, but what about the difference that AI and automation is going to make? Are we going to have to completely rethink the jobs market and the way we work?
Because they say that children these days, I think there was a study, I can't remember who did it, suggesting that millennial and even younger generations, so my children under 10s, will have at least 17 jobs in their old lifetime. And there's been concerns. I think the head of Stowe School made some concerns about whether children were actually being prepared right by the national curriculum to deal with this agile workplace.
agility, yeah.
And would the likes of Microsoft and other big businesses come forward and say, do you know what, we can better prepare your children for the life they're going to have with robotics and AI and all the rest of it than schools are currently equipped to do? And what we do need is to have children being able to respond very quickly to dynamic situations and having to work in a completely different way that, by the way, doesn't even necessarily mirror the 9 till 3:15 that they have at school.
We should go beyond that. We need lifelong learning. Vince Cable's been talking about a lifelong
Everyone
learning.
talks about lifelong learning. It's about implementing it. It's obvious, right?
And
it's
he's
about implementing it.
And he's had some ideas about how you'd implement it. I wish the government did.
So the apprenticeships are... why I'm such a fan of apprenticeships is actually they do what you've just said. Businesses put in your career and your learning and your training and actually in the hands of businesses, and actually many of them know what future jobs are required. The academic system sometimes struggles to keep up with that.
Let's talk about the Lib Dem leadership race, because that is the other leadership race that's on. It's between you and Jo Swinson. One of the differences, and you've mentioned this already in the programme, is that you are supporting this idea of a government of national unity. But it wouldn't be a government of national unity, would it, Ed Davey? It would be a government of Remain unity. I mean, you wouldn't have people like Stephen Kinnock in it or Gillian Keegan, because it's for Remainers, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a number of Brexiteers who actually changed their mind. If you look to people, they're very worried about no deal. They're worried about what Brexit actually means now. And many of them actually do believe that the best thing to do is to take it back to the people.
And they would join a Liberal Democrat government of Remain unity or national unity.
I'm not suggesting it's Liberal Democrat. There's only 12 MPs in Parliament, so it'd be a bit odd, wouldn't it?
Yes.
We're going to work with cross-party, with Tory people, with Labour MPs, with SNP, with the Greens, with Plaid. And it's very unusual, but these are extraordinary times, and it would be a short-term government with one objective: to get the paving legislation for a referendum, to caretake the economy, probably better than it's happening now, and have that vote.
It's anti-democratic.
It's not. It's in Parliament. It's asking for a vote.
Who would lead it? Who would lead it? Because the previous one has not been implemented.
Yes, because you lot have failed to do it. So
because you have failed to do it. I have voted for it 3 times. He's now said he will vote for it. You have not accepted from
and
the
I've never committed to vote for it ever.
I know you didn't.
Your party. Your party was supposed.
Did.
Gillian, your party,
83%
your party was supposed to live. You failed totally.
All right.
Divided.
There's nothing wrong with the agreement.
You're an embarrassment of a government.
But Gillian, Ed Davey always said he would never support that agreement.
I think it's fair to...
Do you not realise that people want real leadership in this country?
I think
they want to give the people the final say. That's what the
I think it's fair to assume...
Don't talk over each other.
I think it's fair to assume, then, that Ed and Gillian won't be in a government of national unity.
I think we can assume that.
I think
will you be in that government of national unity?
I'm not a clairvoyant. We do not know what's
Thanks
going
for clarifying
to happen.
that, yeah.
But I think the chances of that happening are extremely slim. What should happen is that Boris Johnson should bring back the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, as it was before the chain of events that led to Theresa May's resignation. It must include a provision for the second referendum at committee stage, where you've got a debate and a vote on it, which is already Conservative Party policy.
Is that Labour policy?
I'm just a lowly backbencher, Ed. I am just saying what I think.
But you've said you would vote. You said you would vote for it. What do you think about this idea of a government of national unity?
As long as Boris doesn't take it off on a different tangent.
A government of Remain unity was exactly what I was going to say earlier. We're on the same wavelength, Jo.
Which may be fine. But hang
on a minute.
Let her answer the question. Hang on, Ed.
If the Conservatives have no other political direction to go in than owning Brexit. The Liberal Democrats can own Remain, and you'll see how you get on with that. The problem is with Stephen's party and this constructive ambiguity and what people are going to do with their Remain vote if they're Labour supporters. If they swing towards you, that suits the Conservatives down to the ground. Somebody like Boris Johnson, a Eurosceptic leader, could sweep up at a general election, even if one was announced between now and Christmas. That's the reality, because we've seen the numbers, we've seen the polling, we've also seen the complete and utter devastation of Change UK, who came up with this unity over Remain and sunk without a choice.
Let me ask, who would lead this government of national unity?
Well, I think it probably would have to be a Labour member of Parliament. I think
Jeremy Corbyn?
No, I think there'd have to be a senior Labour MP. I would have thought someone like Yvette Cooper, someone like Hilary Benn, of that status, who I think could command support across the House.
Right. In terms of what some of your colleagues are saying in the difficulty for Labour, Caroline Flint, Labour MP, who thinks Brexit should be delivered, has said she would back no deal over no Brexit at all. Which would you back?
This thing about backing no deal doesn't really
Well,
make sense.
all right, let's say no deal was the default, but she wouldn't stop it and she would rather that happened than no Brexit at all. What would you do?
There is no way for Parliament to prevent no deal. It is the legal default position in European law. The only way to stop it without having a referendum would be to revoke. The only way to revoke is if a Prime Minister actually proposes revoke. In fact, they can do that without coming to Parliament. It's done by royal prerogative. So it's not going to happen. The only way to prevent no deal is to leave the European Union with a deal. The only deal that we have on the table, it's not perfect, but it contains a number of very important concessions to Labour's position, is the withdrawal agreement bill. So this talk about preventing no deal, it's not going to happen.
Well, as you say, we're not clairvoyants. Let's just see what happens. This letter that you've written to Jeremy Corbyn, we heard from John McDonnell there that they are probably going to confirm tomorrow a second referendum with Labour backing Remain. You'll have lost.
I don't understand how that works, because we have to have a deal on the table in order to have a referendum. So the way to vote it through is to vote for the withdrawal agreement bill, and at committee stage we have the opportunity to decide whether or not we want to put that deal to a referendum.
And on that, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'm sure they will talk behind me.
Well, that's your off for today, I guess. Well, maybe not. I might do that Panorama show tonight at 8 o'clock, the Panorama thing. I might do that at 8 o'clock, probably. It sounds a bit interesting. I'll have to look for that. Who do you think you are, thingy? Might find it on the BBC somewhere, in the archives somewhere, something like that. Anyway, I will see you later on, probably. Might do a Newsnight as well, depending. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the bell button. Especially the bell button, so you know when I'm streaming. Because I don't always stream at the same time, kind of thing. But on that note, I hope you all have a good day, and I will see you later.